Oh, by the way, yeah, I'm really sorry about having this quiz. I mean, I know you guys have had a tough midsem week, but I thought it would be good for you to have more quizzes because then I can, if we have enough quizzes, I can drop an extra quiz compared to what I said earlier. So that was the reason. Yeah. So as I said, I'll make this quiz shorter than usual so that you can discuss the maths.
So one more question
Yes.
the 19th there is a holiday and there's a quiz day. So will there be any quiz?
Sorry.
I mean, in the next Tuesday, that is 19th November, it's a
Huh.
holiday. And will
Is
there be
it
any quiz on that day?
is it a confirmed holiday? I mean, there was something about it not being sure uh, that it.
I don't know. In the calendar, it shows November 19th is a holiday. I'm
But
not
it
sure.
says star, right? So it depends on the moon and all that. I think.
Okay.
So that's what I understood. I mean, we will wait for a circular from an email from the registrar. Uh, yeah, if
Okay.
it's a holiday, I won't have a question. Uh, and also, I might not take another extra class, so I think it's okay. I mean, you guys are burdened. Right. Okay. So can you see my shared screen?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, good. Jeez, that's a relief. Okay. All right. So remember what we were talking about last time? Oh, okay. So I should have opened that. So we were talking. So we had shown the independence of um, the sample variance and the sample mean of the standard for a random sample of standard normals. So, and we had shown that the sample variance is a chi-squared random variable with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. I mean a scaled version. So, let me define a new distribution, and you will see almost from the definition why this is interesting, and I will also make it explicit very soon. So, let z be a standard normal random variable, and y squared be a chi-squared random variable with n degrees of freedom, which are independent. Okay. Then the random variable uh, defined by uh, z divided by the square root of y squared by n. Remember, this n is the same as the number of degrees of freedom of the chi-squared, is said to have uh, students t distribution with n degrees. This might seem like a funky distribution. I mean, why did you describe it this way? Oops. I mean, why did you construct this complicated function? But we will see soon that, I mean, in the next few minutes why this is interesting. And it's denoted Tn, small t. So this, the name is itself funny. So this was developed, studied and invented or whatever by this guy William Gossett, who was who studied mathematics and statistics, but not statistics, studied mathematics, but was working at Guinness, you know, this brewery. And he was a almost self-trained statistician. So he was working under this famous statistician called Carl Pearson, and Pearson helped him basically with the mathematics. So he came up with this while studying some statistics related to this brewing of beer in the company, and because they wanted, so Guinness wanted to protect their copyright. They did not allow their researchers to publish under their own name, and they could not, say that they were working on beer or on a brewery or working with Guinness or nothing. So that was the condition. So since this guy was working with Carl Pearson, he thought of himself as Pearson's student. So he published his papers under this name, student. So it's called the Student's Day. By the way, Pearson did not realize the importance of this distribution. So he just helped him with the mathematics and left it at that. So let me show you how this distribution looks. But maybe before that, let us just see what it should look like, or what should it behave like for n large. So suppose Z1 up to Zn are IID standard normals. Then y squared by n, which is this quantity in the denominator over here, is basically has the same distribution as the sum of squares of these guys divided by n. But these are a bunch of independent random variables, each of these squares. So you are summing a bunch of independent random variables and dividing by the number of these guys. So what should this go to as n goes to infinity? This should approach what distribution? Just this quantity. Okay, okay, maybe I shouldn't ask you this, but this is basically the average of a bunch of independent random variables. So by the law of large numbers, this should approach the expectation of any one of them, and the chi-squared has expectation 1 by the law of large. Okay, so it approaches not a distribution. So I was trying to trick you. So it doesn't approach a distribution, rather it approaches a number, which is the expectation. And therefore, so this guy, so thus z by square root of y squared by n, small n, tends to standard normal, or tends to n01 random as n goes. Okay, so let me show you a plot of this. So we can see. So I've just simulated I've just plotted the PDFs. So this orange one is T1, and the green one is T4, and the blue one is the standard. I can replace the 4 by something larger. Let's say 10, and you can see it's now very close. The green one is getting close. Okay. So let me without any proofs write down some properties of Tn. So the first is that one can show the PDF By the way, you don't have to memorize any of this, okay? It's fn of x, which is gamma of n plus 1 by 2 divided by gamma of n by 2 square root of n pi times 1 plus x squared by n to the minus n plus 1 by 2, and this is for all x. So it's a distribution over the entire reals. And from this one can show it's a symmetric distribution, so the expectation of Tn is 0 for n greater than or equal to 2. The variance of Tn is n by n minus 2 for n greater than or equal to 3. As I said, okay, so this is symmetric. I mean, this is symmetric because it only depends on x squared. About 0. And the moment generating function is actually not defined for any n. And lastly, let's see what happens at n equals 1. So when n equal to 1, you will actually if you stare at this carefully and you remember that gamma half is root pi, this will actually become 1 by pi. N equals 1, so you'll get 1 by pi times 1 by 1 plus x squared, because this n is 1, so you'll get a power of minus 1 and this n will go away. And so this becomes the Cauchy distribution, which is one of the pathological distributions. So, and you can see that this is not a particularly nice distribution, in the sense, as you can see, some of the moments will not exist. So remember, I told you that for the Cauchy distribution, even the expectation does not exist, as you can see. Okay, so no moments exist for the Cauchy distribution because it's simply not going down to 0 as x goes to infinity fast enough. Okay, this is an important distribution in statistics, so this will become important later on. This is important in what is called hypothesis testing, and we will see this later. I'm not defining these things now. I'm not defining this expression now, but we'll see. And so why did I define this? And this is will follow from last week's lecture, from the last lecture. So let x1 up to xn be IID normals with mean mu and variance sigma squared. X bar the sample mean, and S squared the sample variance. Then square root of n x bar minus mu, or let me write it this way, x bar minus x bar minus mu over s by square root of n is distributed, has distribution, the t distribution with n minus 1 degrees of freedom. And now this should motivate the distribution. So we know that x bar minus mu divided by sigma by root n, this sigma, is a standard normal. So if you take the actual mean and the population mean and the population variance, you get the normal. And now it's natural to ask what happens if you replace the population variance by the sample variance, and that's where the t distribution occurs. Okay. So the proof is easy. So we have shown that n minus 1 s squared by sigma squared has chi-squared distribution with n minus 1 degrees of freedom, and we have shown this. We have also shown that x bar minus mu divided by sigma by root n has standard normal distribution by CLT. Well, actually not by CLT. I mean, this is for any n, and x bar is independent of s squared. We have shown these things in the last class, right? So therefore, we can make this construction. So therefore, so this is a standard normal. This is a chi-squared. So I take the appropriate. I divide and take the appropriate square root. Therefore, let me give myself some space. So x bar minus mu divided by sigma root n divided by square root. So square root of s squared by sigma squared. So I have to divide by chi-squared with whatever degrees of freedom divided by the degrees of freedom. So I have to divide by n minus 1 here, right? So look at this. I mean, if I have chi-squared with n, I have to divide this by n. So I have to divide therefore by s squared by sigma squared, which as you can see, the square root of sigma squared will cancel the sigma, and the square root of n will go upstairs. So this is now equal to square root of n x bar minus mu by s, and this is by the definition exactly Tn minus 1 is. Okay. So we did all the hard work in the last class for proving this. Any questions? Okay.
Isn't root n in the denominator there?
Sorry, so this should have been sigma by. So you see sigma by root n. So the
Oh,
root n.
yes.
Thanks. Okay, so let me make one last remark, one last observation about finite populations. Let's say sampling from finite. So of course we only have finite populations, and so we should keep that in mind. So suppose our population has size n, and a proportion p of them have some binary property. I mean, if the population is people, I mean, there could be, I don't know, green-eyed people. So you have green eyes or you don't have green eyes, like that. Or if it's some equipment, it's functioning or not functioning, like that. So that means roughly NP have it, and n times 1 minus p don't. Okay. So now now if we take a random sample, so now here a random sample of size n. So so we want to take a random sample, And if the population is kind of homogeneous, everybody looks the same as everybody else, then a random sample of size n means that all n choose, capital N choose small n, choose subsets of size n are equally likely, right? So now if therefore the number x, which is the number in this sample having the property, having the above property, is therefore a hypergeometric distribution, right? So we are sampling from capital N, of which capital NP have that property, and we are choosing a sample of size n. Yes, maybe I should not confuse this. Is approximately this hypergeometric distribution. Okay, so I mean I'm saying approximately because this is a finite population, so NP is not a number, etc., etc. Okay, so the usual thing. Yes.
So the population size should be capital N, right?
Yes.
So, but in the first line you have written small n, so that may be confusing afterwards.
Where I have written smaller? Oh, yes, of course. Thank you. Yes, I meant capital. Thank you. Yes, thanks, Anjali. Okay, yes, I meant capital. Sorry. So let me clarify again. The population has size capital N, and we are picking a sample of size small n. Okay, and roughly capital N times P have this property. So there. But now suppose that our population is much larger than the sample. This is true in many applications. Now, if capital N is much larger than n, then the PMF, let me recall the formula for the hypergeometric distribution. So this is approximately NP choose I. So we choose I of them which have this property, and n minus I which do not have this property from the remaining, and we divide by n choosing. Right? This is the definition of the binomial. But now if capital N is much larger than n, then this is approximately, so the first binomial coefficient, if I is much smaller than np, so this is roughly np to the I by I factorial, and by the same argument this is n times 1 minus p to the n minus I divided by n minus I factorial, and the denominator also, so this is n factorial upstairs, n to the n. Okay. Now if you look at this carefully, I have capital N to the I, and I have capital N to the 1 minus I over here, n minus I over here. So I have capital N to the n upstairs, and I also have that in the denominator. So that cancels. And now let's combine. So I have an n factorial by I factorial n minus I factorial. So that's n choose I. And then I have a p to the I, n minus p to the n minus I. Oh, sorry, 1 minus p to the n minus I. But this is exactly the PMF of the binomial distribution with parameters n and p. Therefore, the point is that the hypergeometric distribution can be approximated by the binomial distribution when the underlying population is very large. Okay, that's the option. And this will be this is a useful approximation, and this is why the binomial distribution also occurs in statistical applications. Okay, so now, are there any questions about this? So I'm going to move on to the next chapter. If not. So one thing to keep in mind for finite populations is that this is no longer exactly, I mean, the samples are no longer going to be independent. But they will get better and better. I mean, they'll become closer and closer to being independent in some precise quantifiable way, as when capital N becomes much larger. And that's why you are seeing the binomial. So even though the sample x1 up to x small n does, or let's say samples, or no, does not constitute an independent sample, it is approximately independent when capital N is very large. Okay, so that's where you see this binomial distribution. Okay. All right. So let me start the next chapter on a new page. So we are going to talk about, now we are getting into the real heart of statistics, and the first task ahead is the estimation of parameters. This is a part of what is called statistical inference. We want to infer something from the data. Right? So we have seen that in the first week. Okay, so what is the setting? The setting I have already illustrated through various examples. So suppose x1 up to xn is a sample from a distribution, random sample that is, from a distribution f underscore theta, which depends on a vector theta of unknown parameters. We have seen many examples of this. So for example, you could have n mu sigma squared, where theta is mu and sigma. You could have Poisson lambda, where this theta is just a single lambda. If it's a single parameter, I won't write it as a vector. Okay. So we want to do two things now. So that's the focus of this chapter. So we want two things. The first, from this data, that is. So I have this data, and I want to I want to say something about this unknown distribution. I mean, think about this coin toss example, so which I gave a long time ago. So you have a coin, and you want to determine whether it's fair or not. And what can you do with the coin? You can just keep tossing it. So so let's say x1 up to xn are Bernoulli samples from Bernoulli p samples, and you want to determine whether p is half or not. Right? That's the question. This is a precise and kind of important question. You want to know if your given coin is fair. Okay, I mean maybe not in this language, but it certainly you can think of examples where it would be important to know. For example, you have a random number generator on your computer. You want to know whether it's a good random number generator, and so you can. It's very easy to sample random numbers from a computer. So you take this large N, you take so many coin tosses, or computer coin tosses, and you want to determine whether this is a good random number generator. And I cannot overstress the importance of random number generators. So having a good random number generator in the sense of being accurate is very important. Okay, so this is certainly without doubt a very important question. So what are the two things we want to do? The first thing is to estimate theta. So I want to give you some numbers for these parameters. This we can do in two ways. We will do in two ways, both in terms of exact values and in terms of intervals. And the second thing is to quantify the confidence of this estimate. So how sure are you that this estimate is good? Right? I mean, you can clearly see that if you have, for example, only a sample of size 3, then maybe this is not so confident. You should not be, bragging about this value in public, right? So we want, and when should you be confident, and so on. So these questions we will answer in this chapter. Okay, so let's begin. So any statistic used to estimate the value of the unknown parameters is called an estimator. Okay. And the observed value is then called the estimate. Okay. So what are examples of estimators? I mean, we have seen many of these before. So what is an estimator? You have this data. What do you think could be an estimator? Anybody? What is the most natural example of an estimator? What are quantities that we have calculated from this random sample?
Expectation and variance.
Very good. So expectation and variance are standard, are natural parameters, because are natural estimators, because we know for distributions for standard distributions what the mean and variance are in terms of the parameters, right? So it's natural to think of mean and variance as so this sample mean, sample variance are standard estimators. You could also have the sample median, sample mode. Probably less interesting, but still they can be used depending on the context. Okay, so So now I'm going to discuss the most important technique of estimation, or the most important estimator, which is called the maximum likelihood estimator. This is both very conceptually easy as well as very powerful. Okay, so let me explain the idea. It's quite natural. So suppose capital X1 up to capital Xn is a random sample. From a distribution, okay, and let us denote the PDF or PMF or PDF of the joint of the underlying distribution, this unknown distribution, as f of x1 up to xn mod theta, divided by theta. And I warn you that notice that we are using the same notation. For both discrete and continuous. So I'm not going to say P or F. I mean, it's customary to use F in both cases. Okay. All right. So what's the idea? So since this F is the likelihood roughly the probability. I mean, it's not exactly, I know, but that's why we are using likelihood instead of probability, that we see x1 up to xn when the true value of the parameters is theta, right? So this gives you given the parameters theta to be what they are, this is the likelihood of seeing that. So it is reasonable to assume, so suppose you did see these values, it's quite reasonable to suppose that these values occurred at the largest, at the values of theta, these parameters, when this would be the largest. Okay. So it is reasonable that the values let's say that the values of theta assigning no, what am I to say? Leading to this data would be those with the largest likelihood. Okay. Is this point clear? I mean, it's an important point. So you have seen, let me repeat. So you have seen data x1 up to xn, right? And now you want to determine which value of theta would contribute, would correspond to that. So you look at the joint PDF or PMF and you maximize. So you maximize these parameters which give you these particular values. I mean, because you saw those are the least, those are the most likely to give you those values. Okay, that's the idea. So nothing profound. Therefore, as I said, we should maximize f(x1) up to xn given theta. So this will give us the say MLE for short. This will give us the maximum likelihood estimator, which will denote theta hat. Okay, the values will denote with the hat. Here, this f, from the statistical point of view, is called the likelihood function. I mean, it's nothing but the joint PMF over here. Okay. So, I mean, all this is too abstract, so let's do an example. And we'll do exactly the example of coin tosses that I said earlier. Okay, so you have n independent Bernoulli trials, Bernoulli P trials, x1 up to xn. What is the, well, these are important examples. So what is the maximum likelihood estimator of P? Okay, so you see this question is raised in a very universal way. I have some distribution, in this case Bernoulli P. I have samples from there and I want to estimate the parameter. So I want the estimator. I want to know what statistic will maximize my estimate of P. Okay, so this is, we'll find a precise statistic. Okay, so let us recall. So recall. Okay. Okay, I'll explain this another point in the example. So recall that the probability of x1 equal to 1, these are, so it's a random sample, so independent trials. So I can talk about the probability of any one. So recall that probability of x1 is 1 is p, and the probability that x1 is 0 is 1 minus p, right? This you remember. But this is a bit, I mean, written this way, this is not so easy to handle. But we can make it, we can write it in a single expression compactly. We can say that the probability that x1 is x is p to the x times 1 minus p to the 1 minus x. So you can check that if x is where x belongs to 0 or 1. So if x is 0, I'll get p to the 0, 1 minus p to the 1 minus 0, which is 1 minus p to the 1. If x is 1, I'll get p to the 1, 1 minus p to the 1 minus 1, which is 0. So I'll get p to the 1, which is p. So this is a compact expression. Okay? And now we have now let's write our likelihood function. thus f of x1 up to xn. Now the parameter is p, unknown parameter, is precisely the probability that x1 is small x1, etc. capital Xn is small xn. Right? Where these small xi's belong to 0 or are either 0 or 1. Okay, so let us write it. So this is p to the x1, 1 minus p to the 1 minus x1, etc. p to the xn, 1 minus p to the 1 minus xn. Okay, and what is this? This is just p to the x1 plus up to xn, 1 minus p to the 1 minus n minus x1 plus up to xn. Is it clear? I have p to the x1, p to the x2, and so on, p to the xn. So all of them I have combined in one shot. And similarly, 1 minus p to the 1 minus x1, etc. So all of them have 1 minus p. There are n ones, so I add them, and then I get this. Okay. Now you want to maximize p. So this is an important note, that maximizing f. So how do you maximize p? Well, you take the derivative, set it to 0, etc. But written this way, it's a bit it'll make life much harder. So instead, we will maximize log of f. And this is very useful because usually you will have things in the exponent. And this is equivalent because log is an increasing function. Okay? So some people also use the term log likelihood function because it's used so often. Okay. So instead of maximizing f, we might as well maximize log of f. And then you'll see why life becomes much more simple. So log of f x1 up to xn given p is what? It's small x1 plus up to xn times log p plus n minus x1 plus up to xn log 1 minus p. Right? And now we want to differentiate with respect to p. So to maximize, differentiate with respect to p. I mean, that's the only parameter. These are numbers. So, these are data points. They are given to you. The only parameter unknown is p. So with respect to p. So d by dp of log f, and this write log f. This is x1 plus up to xn divided by p for the first term, plus n minus this divide will give you 1 by 1 minus p, but with a negative sign. So I have minus n minus x1 plus up to xn divided by 1 minus p. This minus is outside. And choose p hat. Problem with talking and writing at the same time. Choose p hat so that d by dp log f is 0. So you have x1 plus up to xn divided by p hat is equal to n minus x1 plus up to xn divided by 1 minus p hat. And you cross multiply, and you will see, okay, so maybe I should do it. So 1 minus p hat x1 plus up to xn is equal to p hat n minus p hat x1 plus up to xn. And now you see that this p hat x1 plus up to xn cancels. This cancels and this part cancels. So p hat is nothing but the familiar x1 plus up to xn by n, which is the sample mean. So the MLE, the maximum likelihood estimator of P, is precisely x bar, the sample mean. So this tells you what is the quantity to look at. So what is the estimator which gives you the maximum likelihood, and that is precisely the sample mean. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, let me do one quick example of application of this, and I'll stop.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So will the MLE of different random variables still be the sample mean only?
Good, very good question. Yes, I was going to come to that. Yes, so we'll discuss that in the next class. I'll do many more examples. You will see that in many cases, it is actually the sample mean, which is a good estimator. But of course, if you have more than one parameter, then it's not enough to have the sample mean. So then, again, a natural guess might be the sample variance, and again, that will also come up. Yeah, but very good question. So let me do a quick application, and rather surprising. So two proofreaders. This is from the book. You can look at it later. So let's call them R1, R2. Are given the same book to read. So when a new book is published, proofreaders are asked to check for mistakes. So suppose R1 and R2 find N1 slash R1 slash R2 find N1 slash N2 typos with N sub 1, 2 found by both. Estimate the total number, capital N, of typos. Okay, so they're printing mistakes. R1 finds N1, R2 finds N2 typos, and of these N1, N sub 1, 2 are common ones. Okay, they're found by both. And just from this information, using nothing else, you have to estimate the total number of typos. So it seems like a pretty difficult question, but assuming a quite reasonable model, we can do it. So the model we will assume is that each error or each typo is found by Ri, by the proofreader Ri, with probability Pi. Okay. So let's look at R1. So R1 has found N1 out of N errors, the grand total of N errors. So by what we have seen, in this above calculation, a good estimate of P1 is N1 by N, right? So P1 is approximately N1 by N. On the other hand, R1 has also found N12 out of N2 errors. that P2 found, that R2 found, typos. Right? So these are, so we assume that these are all independent. Right? So among these N2 typos, R1 found N1 two of those. Therefore, let me rewrite this. Good estimate of P1 is P1 hat, which is this. So therefore, another good estimate. So we are assuming N1 and N2 are large. Another good estimate of P1 is P1 hat, which is approximately N12 by N2. So thus, N1 by N is approximately N12 by N2, and that implies N is approximately N1 N2 divided by N12, which is nice and symmetric, right? So this shows that if you had done, I mean, we didn't lose anything by considering R1. We could have considered R2 and you would have found the same answer. And so this tells you how many errors to expect in the book, right? So it's at first bite the question, at first sight the question might have seemed a bit unreasonable. I mean, how the hell do you know how many total number of typos are there? But just assuming that each typo is found independently with some unknown probability, we can get the answer. Okay, get a reasonably good answer. Any questions? I'll stop. Okay. Then see you next week. Oh, sorry. Good luck for the quiz tomorrow.